Preparing for the hate comments in 3, 2, 1. Hey guys, it's the Millblade 5, and welcome to a response that I've kept at the back of the list of videos I planned, as tons of people have already made videos about this. Egoraptor's Zelda Sequelitis. Now, it appears that a lot of people didn't even bother to pay any attention to my Sonic Adventure Games Grumps response video, so I'll say this again. I don't hate Egoraptor. I like Egoraptor. His videos are funny, and I'm a big fan of Game Grumps and Starbomb, so I'm not making this video to hate on him. Get that? Now, about a year and a half ago, Egoraptor, or Aaron as I'll refer to him for the rest of this video, made a new episode of his Sequelitis series where he critically views one game and its sequel to see which is better. For this one, he looked at Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. So, before I start, I want to say that I'm not trying to be that guy. If you've seen the video, you know what I'm talking about. Even though Ocarina of Time is my personal favorite Zelda game, at least Ocarina of Time for 3D, because I think it's the most enjoyable game in the series with the least serious flaws, I do think it is overrated. People say it's the greatest game ever made, which clearly is not true, as the game does have a lot of flaws. Also, I'm not trying to criticize Aaron's opinion. My biggest issue with this whole video, which I will constantly reference back to, is that Sequelitis is about taking a critical view at two games. However, the majority of the game's flaws, according to Aaron, are more just personal issues he has with the game, rather than actual problems with it that the majority of the Zelda community can agree are actual problems with the game. Therefore, I feel this video is a bit unfair on Ocarina of Time, as well as the fact that I don't think this should be a Sequelitis video, since it doesn't remove Aaron's biases to these games. Now, just letting you know, I'm not going to cover the Skyward Sword stuff in the video, just because I've talked about Skyward Sword enough on this channel, and my arguments also apply to Aaron's complaints, along with some other arguments that I'll bring up later on in this video. Plus, the Skyward Sword complaints are completely pointless in the video. What's weird is that at a panel, Aaron and Barry said that the next Sequelitis would be about how much they hate Skyward Sword, with a bit of a condescending comment from Barry, which makes me wonder why they didn't just make a video about why they hate Skyward Sword, rather than tacking it onto a video about two Zelda games which aren't related to it. And just to show how pointless it is, I remember coming across a video of the Sequelitis, without the bullshit, as the video says, not me, that's what the video said. And it was 20 minutes long compared to the 30-minute length of the original video, showing that about a third of the video is things that are pointless for what this video is about. So getting to the video, my big issue, other than what I've mentioned so far, is that I find it really unfair to compare A Link to the Past with Ocarina of Time, as the former is a 2D game and the latter is a 3D game. This means they have different styles, and as such use different level design and in some cases mechanics. It reminds me of Some Call Me Johnny's review of Ocarina of Time during his Zelda marathon, in which one of the things that bothered me about that review was that Johnny complained about Ocarina of Time being too long by comparing it to A Link to the Past, which is really unfair in my opinion, as 3D games are typically longer than 2D games, and they are two different styles. So, now we get to Aaron's reasons why Ocarina of Time is worse than A Link to the Past, even though it's just his opinion. And to help get this video short, I'm only going to focus on things that I personally disagree with, or find as personal issues rather than flaws. Everything else, aside from the Skyward Sword complaints that I don't mention, I agree with. So for the first of Aaron's arguments that I personally disagree with is kind of Z-targeting. I mean, I agree with him at the first part, but not the second part. Aaron basically says that the Z-targeting creates a disconnection with the world around you, and that the combat and exploration don't mix. I can see where Aaron is coming from with this, however, I never felt Z-targeting disconnected you from the world, rather than it helps you concentrate on what you need to focus on in a certain situation, such as combat with enemies, which is the main purpose of Z-targeting. Plus, the argument about combat and exploration not mixing is kind of an instance of why I think a 2D Zelda game and a 3D Zelda game shouldn't be compared to each other, is that due to 2D games being, well, 2D, is that the flat layout forces the developers to put enemies and dungeons and signs together, forcing both combat and exploration to mix in a way, while the 3D games, they have to spread things out a bit more and focus on more ways to explore, such as climbing, to justify it being a 3D game. So the combat doesn't mix as well, just because they need to put more of an emphasis on exploration and different ways to do that. Plus, there was never really many instances in any Zelda game where I thought combat and exploration were completely mixed. To me, they're like two sides of a coin. Plus, on Aaron's argument about killing each individual Keese or bats, I personally think that is only an issue in the N64 Zelda games, as in the later 3D games, Keys move much faster, which resembles how fast you can kill them in the 2D games. So, Aaron's next complaint is the waiting. I remember when I first saw this video, my reaction to this was, huh? Because I never found the waiting to be that much of an issue. I did find it annoying times with enemies like Wolfos, but I personally don't think it's that big of an issue to talk about compared to some of Ocarina of Time's bigger problems, such as the Water Temple and so on. Whenever I'm playing Ocarina of Time, I don't really notice the waiting as much as when I'm not playing the game, as the game kind of sucks me in and makes me not realize how long the wait actually is. Also, one thing that I only realized while writing the script for this video is that there is one advantage to the waiting, which I'm surprised Aaron didn't talk about, which is that the waiting is actually a way of teaching the player different enemy patterns. Take Stalfos, for example. They have their shields up until they are about to attack you. Therefore, you learn the Stalfos' pattern and how to defeat them. You can also see this with Wolfos, as you can only hit them after they attack. It helps you learn different tactics for enemies, kind of like what Aaron said about the Iron Knuckle. Now, does that completely excuse it? No, but it is, in my opinion, a reason why it's not as bad as Aaron makes it out to be. Also, I was really confused by how Aaron said waiting existed as an illusion to make a battle harder than it is, because at least to me, it isn't. I'm just like, okay, just wait for the next chance to attack. I'm not like, oh my god, this is taking a long time, this is like the hardest thing ever. So next, Aaron talks about how puzzles that involve shooting an eyeball, which has been almost every Zelda game, or whacking a diamond, is really stupid. My only issue I have with this is that I think it's something so minuscule to talk about, it only takes like 2 seconds to do. I'm not saying Aaron's wrong. I'm just saying that out of all of Ocarina of Time's flaws, this one is so minuscule and so quick to deal with that I think the time should have been focused on a bigger issue. Like the Water Temple. Okay, so this next part is really short, but I feel like I should quickly go over this. Aaron complains about how spike traps can come around the corner, which you can't see. My only issue is that not only is this also minuscule as these traps rarely appear, but also, since you can change the camera angle with Z-targeting, you can make it so that you can see them. If the camera was fixed all the time, this would definitely be a big flaw of the game. Also, Aaron complains about this since you can see them in A Link to the Past and in the original Zelda. That's because they're 2D games with, this over-the-top display. This is another reason why I think 2D and 3D games shouldn't be compared. With the bird's eye view kind of display, you can see where everything is. Well, with the 3D games, obviously the way 3D games are made, you don't get that. So next, and this is probably the argument that I personally disagree with the most, is that Aaron complains about the opening chest animation, which is something that I also think is minuscule, as it takes like 10 seconds at most, when compared to A Link to the Past, where you backtrack to the chest. Now, I get what Aaron is saying at this part, but I think Ocarina of Time does the suspense better, because on your first time playing the game, the animation along with the music makes you wonder, oh my god, what am I going to get? And it does create a lot of suspense, as well as showing you that you got something very important. You're like, oh my god, I got something good, what could it be, what could it be? In Link to the Past, you have to backtrack, which I personally think is kind of tedious, as all you're doing is going back to a previous area to get an item in order to progress. Well, in Ocarina of Time, the chest is right there after the defeat of the mini-boss, which means that you still accomplish something in order to get it. Now, you can argue that if you're replaying the game, then the animation is a chore, as you already know what it is, and that is true. However, I think this also makes A Link to the Past backtracking worse, as you'd be like, alright, I know I'm gonna get the hook shot, but I gotta go all the way back to the chest and open it. Next, Aaron goes back to more waiting by complaining about things like waiting for bombs to blow up and waiting for doors to take a second to shut and watching the result of the puzzle you completed was, etc. I also heavily disagree with this for a few reasons, because for one, some of these are also in A Link to the Past, which creates a bit of a contradiction. Second, with things like bombs waiting for them to blow up, it allows you to move out of the way so you don't get hit, especially when you drop them at your feet. It's why fuses were invented in real life, and seeing what the puzzle did helps, as since the areas have more depth with being 3D, you can automatically know what a button you press is going to do, for example. So the game, in most cases, has to show you so you know what to do. I find this a bit weird, as earlier on, Aaron talked about how puzzles make the game rewarding. they wouldn't be rewarding if you didn't know what they did. In a 2D Zelda game, you see the whole room, so you already know what the puzzle did, while in 3D Zelda games, you have extra depth due to the Z-axis and a greater use of the Y-axis. So, in those cases, you most likely need to be shown what the puzzle did in order to know what you did and feel satisfied. You'd be like, alright, press the button. What did that do? And then you're just like roaming around the room for a while and roaming around the entire dungeon, and then you see, oh, it opened this door! That just wasted my time! The only one I agree with is with switching between adult and child Link and needing to warp, as it is tedious when put together, although Ocarina of Time does need more time to actually load because of wider areas. So, next, Aaron complains about how the dungeon item spoils the boss. My argument against that is that the item only gives you an idea of what you need to do, but not exactly. Like, yeah, you know you need to grab onto something with the hook shot, for example, but you don't know what exactly that is, what exactly you need to do. If we take Twin Rover, for example, you know from the mirror shield that you have to reflect stuff, but it doesn't tell you that you're fighting two people at once and that you need to reflect the fire to the ice and vice versa. Plus, it doesn't spoil you on what the boss is and looks like, or even what they're called, so I don't see why this is that big of an issue, especially when compared to other issues, like the water temple. Okay, so while I've understood Aaron's arguments so far to an extent, this one makes no sense to me. Aaron complains about how the game makes you emotionally invested in the world. I know he doesn't say that, but that's what he's basically complaining about. He complains about how the game tells you how your actions are helping others, such as the Sheikah, the Hylians, and helping the Gorons to eat, for example. This really confuses me because this is something I think improves on A Link to the Past, as you feel more accomplished when you learn that your actions helped others. Plus, from a story standpoint, this helps make you interested in the world and the characters, and encourage you to accomplish your goal of defeating Ganondorf and saving Hyrule. Hell, this helps you see what is at stake if Link loses by making you care about the characters in the world. It's one of the reasons why I love Twilight Princess so much, because it does an amazing job of making you care about the characters in the world that encourages you to continue. And I think Ocarina of Time is what started that. An issue I have with A Link to the Past is that they don't emotionally invest you. For example, you don't learn anything about the Seven Maidens other than Zelda, of course, so you're not that interested about them. You're like, okay, who's this chick? Bye, to whoever you are. So you're more just interested in being the game rather than being emotionally invested, like thinking, oh god, these poor women are being kidnapped and transported to this other dark world. I have to save them. A Link Between Worlds does a better job at this because they make the characters more memorable, shows what's at risk by giving more plot to Lorule than they did with the Dark World, and even introduces you to the Seven Sages, except for one, prior to having to save them to make you care about them. This is one reason why I think A Link Between Worlds is better than A Link to the Past. I know that'll be an unpopular opinion, but it's what I personally think. Furthermore, Aaron complains about how some areas are locked off, such as Death Mountain, until you're given a reason to go there, as he says. I understand how Aaron finds this limiting, but what bothers me about this is that not only does A Link to the Past do this, pretty much any game with plot does this. Video games currently lock off areas until you progress in the plot, typically as a way of showing why you need to go to this location, as well as investing you in the game's world and characters, as I mentioned earlier. Ocarina of Time isn't the first and only game to do this. This is done all the time, so it confuses me why Aaron thinks this is such a huge flaw. If you go to Death Mountain and the Dodongo Caverns prior to learning about the plot, you'll be thinking, what's the point in this? Why am I doing this the whole time? By meeting Zelda, it gives you the point to understand why you're doing this. Alright, I'm doing this to get the gems to open the door of time and stopping Ganondorf, as well as helping the Gorons. With the example Aaron gives of having a Goron partner in the Dodongo Cavern to encourage you to progress, I personally find it unnecessary. Plus, I don't know how Nintendo will be able to program that into an N64 game. Also, who the hell tries to go to Death Mountain before Hyrule Castle? I've never seen anybody try to go to Death Mountain before Hyrule Castle, since Hyrule Castle is the area of more interest. So that's all the arguments that I personally disagree with. Aside from this guy with some complaints, everything else I agree with. Again, I'm not trying to get at Aaron for his opinion. It's his opinion and that's fine. But my issue is just that Sequelitis is about taking a critical view at both games. Aaron even mentions this at the beginning to the Ocarina of Time fanboy. So I find it so weird that a lot of Aaron's reasons for why Ocarina of Time is worse are just his own personal issues rather than big legitimate flaws that the majority of the Zelda community can agree on. Such as the Water Temple! Seriously, I was shocked that Aaron didn't even mention the Water Temple, as that is one of, if not the biggest flaw with Ocarina of Time, as it's so tedious. I can never be without a guide. But aside from that, my other major issue is that, as I mentioned before, comparing a 2D game to a 3D game is unfair in my opinion, as Aaron's flaws of Ocarina of Time were mainly to do with changes that had to be made for the 3D world. Also, what confuses me is that out of all Zelda games, Aaron chooses A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time to compare. I mean, they aren't sequels, and there are clear differences. It would have made much more sense to compare either A Link to the Past with A Link Between Worlds, especially considering how Aaron talks a lot about A Link Between Worlds at the end of the video, or Ocarina of Time with Majora's Mask, because they are both sequels. You know, because the series is called Sequelitis. I mean, I have never heard of any debate between which of these two games were better before this video was made. But despite that, Aaron still accomplished his goal. He still showed which game is the better one. Neither. Just think about it. Aaron's reasons why Ocarina of Time is worse are just his personal issues with the game, and even then, most of them are due to the fact that Ocarina of Time is a 3D game. As I've said before, comparing a 2D game and a 3D game is unfair due to the different styles, so making comparisons are pretty much pointless. Also, which game is better is entirely the opinion and preferences of the player. If you prefer the 2D games like Aaron does, then you're going to think A Link to the Past is better because of the reasons why you prefer the 2D Zelda games. While if you prefer the 3D games like me, you're going to prefer Ocarina of Time for the reasons why you prefer the 3D Zelda games. It's entirely a matter of preference and which style you prefer more, as both games are impossible to compare, which is better due to the different dimensions. Neither game is better. Whichever is better depends on whether you like the 2D Zelda games more or the 3D Zelda games more. And if Aaron is watching this, although I highly doubt that, I do hope that if you make more Sequelitis videos that you'll only compare 2D games with 2D games and 3D games with 3D games for the reasons of what I just talked about, as they are so hard and practically impossible to compare to each other. So with that, I'll probably be found dead in the ditch after the Egoraptor fans find me, and I hope that all of us can move past this debate and just let it go. And with that, I'll see you guys for my next response video.